Hi friends, I'm Ryan Hembree, and in this video I'm going to be investigating the Exodus event recorded in the Bible. Was this a real historical event, or is this just myth, legend, or even worse, downright fiction? Well, this is a huge topic that would require more than just one video, which is why I'm going to be just focusing on the main event today, Israel's miraculous escape from Egypt by way of the Red Sea. And there's three big questions that I want to try and answer today. Number one, is it logistically possible that millions of Israelites could have made this journey? Number two, where did the splitting of the water occur? And number three, and this is the big one, is the splitting of a large body of water even possible? Well, let's open the Bible and see what it has to say about this. Alright, as I mentioned, one of the main issues people have with the Exodus story is the sheer number of people involved. According to Exodus chapter 12 verse 37, there were about 600,000 men on foot besides children. But if we include children and women and the infirm, then this number would be more like 2 to 3 million people. A very large company indeed. While it is true that the Bible makes a point of how fertile the Israelites were in Egypt, to have a population explosion from just 12 patriarchs to 2 to 3 million in only a few hundred years seems hard to believe. Such a great multitude in the wilderness could also pose certain logistical challenges. I mean, would getting millions of people across a narrow channel through the sea even be possible? And what about the food and water requirements? And another issue with such a large population is that the Merneptah Stele, dated to the 13th century BC, mentions Israel, and it seems to suggest that they were small compared to some of the other nations. But if Israel numbered between 2 and 3 million, then they would have been the most populous nation on earth. To overcome these apparent issues, some Bible scholars contend that the number 600,000 is actually a mistranslation of the Hebrew text. As one of these scholars explains, the key Hebrew word here is aleph, which in the standard translations is interpreted as thousand. So the Bible literally reads that there were 600 aleph fighting men. Okay, so if it doesn't mean thousand then what does it mean? Well, one possibility is that aleph should be translated as family or clan. As a matter of fact, this is exactly how the same term is used in Judges chapter 6 verse 15, where Gideon says, "My clan," or aleph, is the weakest. So if this is the way the word is being used in Exodus 12:37, then it's actually reporting that 600 families worth of fighting men were leaving Egypt. Now, it's also possible that aleph means something like platoon or squadron, more or less as we have it in Numbers chapter 1 verse 16, where it says, "These are the ones selected from the congregation, the leaders of the ancestral tribes, the heads of the squadrons of Israel." If each squadron here represented a corresponding clan, and if each squadron was only constituted by 10 or so fighting-aged men drawn from each clan, then this is quite a game changer as far as the numbers are concerned. In fact, this would bring it from 2 to 3 million down to only about 30,000 at the most. On the other hand, there are those who believe that reinterpreting Exodus 12:37 in this way is unnecessary and in the end creates more problems than it solves. That's because several biblical passages seem to confirm this larger population. One of these is Exodus 38 verses 25 and 26, where God collects half a shekel from every man 20 years old and up. Based on the sum of money collected, there were 603,550 men, which again brings the total population back up to 2 to 3 million. But scholars who defend the traditional translation of 600,000 men see no problem with such large numbers. They note that although a population growth from 12 patriarchs to 2 to 3 million people in only a few hundred years seems impossible, scientific studies in human population growth have demonstrated that it is possible, especially if the males had more than one wife. They also point out that there are modern examples of massive groups of people fitting into small spaces, so millions of Israelites passing over a dry path through the sea isn't a problem. Food and water are also not an issue when you consider that God was their sustainer. In fact, He provided them water, quails, and even bread from heaven. Also, based upon the writings of Herodotus, Theocritus, Josephus, and others, some have challenged the idea that ancient populations were small, and therefore that Israel must also be small. Now, unfortunately, there is no consensus among scholars on this issue, and there's a lot more to this discussion. But the good news is that the problem isn't with the Bible, only our understanding of it. As one author puts it, the number of elifs recorded in the Bible that departed from Egypt is without error and infallible. The issue is not with the Bible. The issue is determining what the original Hebrew text means and translating those figures into English in a way that most accurately reflects the original meaning. Okay, so now that we got the numbers sorted out, let's talk about where the Israelites crossed over on dry ground. Now, the Bible records that this happened at the Red Sea, but this is a massive body of water, so trying to lock down a specific location is very hard. And to make matters even more difficult, some Bible scholars think that the name Red Sea is actually a mistranslation of the Hebrew Yam Suf. They believe that it should be translated Sea of Reeds instead, and they offer up 3 reasons for that. First, the Hebrew term suf is said to derive from the Egyptian word that means papyrus reeds. As a matter of fact, this is exactly what suf means in Exodus chapter 2, verses 3 and 5, where baby Moses' ark or chest is nestled among the reeds. Second, the Red Sea is a saltwater body, but reeds only grow in fresh water. So Yam Suf, they say, cannot refer to the Red Sea. Third, the only reason that Suf became associated with red is on account of a mistranslation of the Greek Septuagint. Now, the Septuagint is a pre-Christian Greek translation of the Old Testament. Now, apparently not knowing how to translate this term, the translators wrote Red Sea. And this mistranslation was then picked up in Augustine's Latin Vulgate and has been perpetuated ever since. But hold on just a minute. There are still a lot of good Bible scholars who hold to the traditional translation of Red Sea, and they also have a good reason. First, they point out that even if Yam Suf technically means Sea of Reeds or Reed Sea, this doesn't change the fact that the scriptures clearly apply the same phrase to the Red Sea or its extensions, the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. That is, in every case, the biblical writers intentionally use Yam Suf to refer to a body of water that they know full well does not have reeds. Second, it turns out that Suf may not always mean reeds after all. Suf could also be a variant of Soph, which means end or extinction. If so, then neither Red Sea or Reed Sea is the correct translation, but rather Sea of the End or Sea of Extinction. Now, this could be taken one of 2 ways. Taking this translation literally, Sea of the End could be referring to the sea at the end of the land of Egypt, that is, the Red Sea. But if we take this translation more figuratively, then it would be the Sea of Extinction, meaning that Yam Suf wouldn't have anything at all to do with the physical features of the water, but rather with what it symbolizes, chaos and destruction. Now, it is also possible to understand it both literally and figuratively. The sea at the end of Egypt put an end to the Egyptian army. Of course, at the end of the day, nobody really knows exactly where the Israelites crossed, and to be honest, the debate between Red Sea versus Reed Sea and other nearby bodies of water becomes almost pointless anyway when we consider how much the geological features of the earth, including the Egyptian coastline, have changed since the time of Moses. Still, while we don't know the exact location, of this we can be sure. It was a significant body of water, large and deep enough to drown the Egyptian army. Alright, so we've gone through all that to answer the biggest question that people have surrounding the Exodus event. Out of everything else, this is the number one objection that people have with believing that the Exodus was a real event in history. And that's mainly due to a bias against anything supernatural, which I'll talk about in a bit. But what doesn't help this cause are things like inaccurate Hollywood remakes. And one example is the 1956 movie called The 10 Commandments, starring Charlton Heston as Moses. And in that film, Moses uses his staff to split the waters instantaneously. Now, it's definitely entertaining to watch, but that's not what really happened. The Bible records that Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. So God used a strong east wind which blew all night, which split the waters. Of course, skeptics still insist that events like this could never happen, but the truth is similar events have happened. It wasn't that long ago when Hurricane Irma literally sucked up billions of gallons of ocean water. While there was a lot of coverage on this massive hurricane, Breaking Israel News understood its true significance. They reported, "A strange sight straight out of the Bible suddenly appeared when the powerful winds of Hurricane Irma blew away the parts of the Atlantic Ocean, leaving behind swaths of land dry enough for the children of Israel to tread upon. America witnessed the awe-inspiring might of extremes in God's mastery over nature when two of the most devastating and powerful hurricanes in history hit the southern Atlantic coast back to back. Harvey dumped a record 51.8 inches of rain on Texas, and Irma, the most powerful hurricane ever recorded over the Atlantic, displayed an entirely different aspect of God's might, with 190-mile-per-hour winds. When Irma finally made landfall in Florida, it had calmed considerably, but the winds were still strong enough to literally blow the ocean away. In the opposite manner of water-laden Hurricane Harvey, Irma made dry pathways through the ocean in precisely the manner described in Exodus, when the children of Israel were in dire straits on the shore of the Red Sea. This amazing and rare phenomenon occurred in both the Bahamas and Florida. Areas normally part of the ocean were suddenly dry, leaving boats and sea mammals stranded. The strange sight was the result of the same forces that flooded Texas, and the same force that divided the Red Sea: powerful winds. Upon reviewing video footage of this rare phenomenon, atmospheric scientist Angela Fritz even commented, "I knew right away that even though it seemed impossible, it was absolutely legit. As a meteorologist, there are things you learn in textbooks that you may never see in person. You know they happen theoretically, but the chances of seeing the most extraordinary weather phenomena are slim to none." Now, while I definitely agree that God used the natural forces of Irma to demonstrate how an event like the Exodus really can happen, we cannot escape the fact that the splitting of the sea in Exodus was a miracle of God. And I'm not just talking about the impeccable timing of it. Notice what Exodus chapter 14 verse 22 says, "And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left." While a natural wind could raise the water to a great height on one side and produce dry land, natural phenomena like these couldn't produce a wall of water on both the left and right sides, as Exodus records. So it looks as if God used both natural and supernatural means to accomplish this particular feat. The natural sign was a strong east wind, signifying that it was done by the power of God, who the winds and the seas obey. But the supernatural sign was the walling up of the water on either side of the pathway. Now, for those of you who reject anything supernatural, I get it, and I plan to do other videos on the existence of God and miracles in the future. But for now, let me just say that I realize that the supernatural isn't easy to accept, especially as we become adults. There was even a time when I rejected the supernatural. I was really quite the skeptic. So what changed my mind? Well, I actually experienced a supernatural event for myself. And because it happened to me personally, I couldn't deny it. And because of the context of that miracle, I realized in that moment that God was real and that His word, the Bible, was true. It was truly a life-changing moment. And you know, countless others like me have had similar encounters. And what I learned was that just because I had a bias against the supernatural didn't change the fact that legitimate miracles do happen. And the Exodus event was one of them. The fact that it was a miracle doesn't challenge the reality of that event.